Hi everyone and welcome back to the multiverse of 100 plus data science project series. In this video, we're going to be creating here a multi-AI agent system using Python's, LangGraph, Flask, and React.js. If you want to learn Python's, machine learning, data science, deep learning, and Gen AI, subscribe my YouTube channel. Let's have a look about the application called Jarvis Assistant. So if I type here a message called hi, let's say hi. And also you can see here agent flow waiting for the agent step. Now, if I add here a task, let's add a new task, buy groceries for tomorrow. And if I click here send button, you can also use the enter button from your keyboard. So it will basically calling here an agent called Todoist agent. You can see successfully transfer back to supervisor and it is completely directed by the LangGraph. So the task buy grocery for tomorrow has been added to your Todoist. If you wanted to checking this out, you can check in the Todoist API. You can see the inbox buy grocery for tomorrow. Now you can also show the task that is available inside our API. So you can say that show all tasks like that. Okay, show all tasks. You can also delete the tasks from it. Okay, it's your job to do that. I just going to show the all tasks. The tasks are buy groceries for tomorrow. No due date. Priority is the 4 lowest. You can say lowest priority and the project ID as well. Okay. Now you can also checking for the current weathers. So we can also integrate here the weather API as well. So let's say current weather. We can say the forecast in Kolkata. We can say the Kolkata, India. Okay. So hit enter. It will basically calling here the weather API. You can see weather agents successfully transfer back to supervisors and you can see the output. The current weather in Kolkata, India is 28.97 degrees Celsius with haze, humidity of 89% and wind speed of 5.14 meter per seconds. Now you can see it basically calling here the weather agents. Now you can also do the calculation. Let's say what is, let's say 2 plus 2 into 3. Okay, we can just checking this out. You can do any kind of calculation on here. You can see it as calling here the math agent. The answer is basically 8. So you can also write a poem. So give me a funny programming poem. So it will basically calling here our poem agents. You can see that. So a programmer life for me, I coded all night. My bugs still shine bright. I debug with all my might, but error is still ignite. Okay. So this is how you can see that it will basically calling the multi-AI agent system. So in this video, we're going to creating here this full application. So today I need to start this tutorial by taking the name of Lord Ganesha. So let's start. So first, let's have a look about the tools and tech stack that is used in order to building here our applications. So first tools is about the Flux. So it's nothing but a web server framework is provided by the Pythons. And we are basically using here this Flux for handling the prompt route to receive the user inputs and also returning here the streaming response. See, the most important one is streaming response. The first one. The second one is Flux codes, also called the cross origin resource sharing, because it's basically enable the cross origin request like front end to backends. So in the case of front end, we are basically using here different domain. We are using here the React.js and our link or the localhost link should be the different. And in the backend, we are going to be basically using here the Flux. So that's why we are going to using here a cross origin request. That's called the codes for the resource sharings. And the third one, the important one called the LangGraph. It's called LangGraph Supervisors. So it's basically used for orchestration layer for supervising the multiple agents. Because you're creating here multiple number of agents, you need to also transfer back to the agent to the supervisors. It's basically route the user input to the most relevant specialized agent. So if I type here 2 plus 2, it is basically calling here the math agents. And the fourth one is a large language model. So you need to calling here a function called the get LLM. So it is basically handling here the large language model itself. So it's a base language model like you can use the OpenAI or GPT or any other kind of LLM in the backends. So you're using here the Grok. So Grok Cloud. So Grok Cloud give us free and open source model and you're using the Llama model from it. So act as the reasoning engines behind all agent and the supervisors. And the fifth one is called a specialized agent. I mean, which kind of agent that you're going to creating that? So create by a create agents. It's called the create react agents. Okay. So we have the basically have the 5 agents. First one is the math agents. It basically do the calculations of the numerical problems. And we have the poem agents. It for creating or writing the poems. Then you have the weather agents. It basically fetching the weather informations. And fourth, we have the launch vehicle agent. It basically give you some kind of event related to a space rocket or event lookup. And the last one is called the Todoist agent. It's basically for the task management. You can add, you can edit, you can delete, you can read the tasks from the Todoist API. And the last one is the important one. It's called the streaming response, also called the server sent event. Server sent events SSE, that is completely used by the Flux. So when using here this one for allow the front end to get some real time increment response instead of waiting for the full output. Okay, to just give me some kind of incremental response. So if you see the code response, it will creating here a functions called generative stream. You will show in the code, and we actually added here the meme type is basically text event streams. So we are going to handling the SSE event as well in our applications. So this is the whole tool and tech stack that is used by our applications. Now it's time to writing our code and to building our applications. So let us start right now. All right, so now it's time to creating here our applications. So for this case, you're going to be using here the Flux. So first, let's see how can you basically creating here a simple running server using Flux. And after that, we are going to writing all of the code for how can you creating here the AI agents. So let's click on here and creating here a file called app.py. So let's make it in a small letter. Let's say app.py. So first, we're going to importing here the Flux. So let's say from Flux, we're going to import here the Flux. So using this Flux, we basically creating here our applications. So let's also import here the response because you just show here and basic response. Also, let's import here Flux codes. We're going to import here the codes itself. So let's say CORS. So it's called cross origin support, or you can say cross origin system. So because we are going to creating here our backend server using here the Flux, and the front end, the front end you're going to design it using the React.js. So both the language is different because the Flux is actually using the Python programming language, and React.js is internally using here the JavaScript. So this is the cross origin support, which will have the different server. Okay. So that's why I need to also import it here, CORS. Now you're going to creating here an Flux application. Let's say Flux, and then I'm going to give it to here underscore name. So today I stopped the camera because it might be the long video, काफी लंबा भी हो सकता है, इसलिए मैं इसको वीडियो का जो कैमरा है ना उसको बंद कर दिया बस. Okay. Now let's say we need to pass in here the app inside the course. Okay. And after that, what I can do is simply creating here an basic route. So let's app, and then we passing here the route. So let's give it here an initial route, and then you can give it to here the method. So the initial method is basically the get method. So the get method, you can easily access it from the server. Access it using the web browsers. So then we need to creating here an function. Let's say you can make it as the index, or you can give it as a hook, whatever you can. And then you can simply go to returning here one response. Let's say response. So let's say response. And then you can say that the Flux server is basically running like that. You can give it to here. Let's say Flux server is running. Okay, running. And then you can say that one meme type. We can give it to here text, plain text. Okay. So let's say text. So you can say that this is a plain text. Okay. And after that, you're simply going to calling here our main methods. Main function, right? So let's say name is equal to underscore main. So it should be here. It gave me auto suggestions. Also, you can see here I have my varchar. I just know it. Okay, so that it don't give me auto suggestions. So let's run, and then I can give it here a port number. Let's give it here, let's say 11,000 as a port number. I just give it here. Okay. Now let's save it and make sure that you are using Python 3.12 because you're going to be using here an library called LangGraph. That's why. Okay. So make sure that your Python version should be matched with me. So it will be better for you, also me. So you can just click on here. You can run it in the terminal, or you can just click on here to run Python file. So it is just running it in a local server. Okay. Roles init got an exceptions argument called methods. Okay. It's a method. It's not a method. It's called the methods. So in here, you can basically give it here any kind of methods like the get method, the post method, or the put method. You can give it to here. So that's why this is the plural number. Okay. So now let's click here to run Python file. Now you can access it from the browser, or as well as you can access it from the Postman. So I can go on here. Let's click on the Postman in the Postman, and you can see some kind of actually request, you can get it. I mean, get request, the post request, the put, the patch, the delete, you can call any of them. So in our server, you just mentioned here the get method, so you can call it here to click on send request, and it's sending the request, and you can see Flask server is basically running. So you can also test it out in our applications, I mean in our browser actually. So what I can do is simply going to pasting here the link that I copied. You can see Flask server is running. So it's successfully creating here as server, which one is basically running. Now, what we need to do, we need to creating here some kind of folder structure for creating here these AI agents. Okay. So what I can do, first we're going to creating here the folder structures. So let's click on here. So let's first create a folder called agents. And then you have another folder called config. Here you basically have all of the configurations, let's say the large language models, or the open either API or the space depth API, everything you're going to store it inside this config file. So config folder. And then we have the models. Here you basically have our the models itself. And then we also have our tools that we basically call it from our the AI agents. Okay. So first, what I can do basically, I'm simply going to actually I'm simply going to creating here the .env file on here. So let's say .env file. Here you basically storing here our Grok API key, the Open Weather API key, as well as the Todoist API key. So in our application, we basically creating here some kind of tools, and you're going to call it using here the AI agents systems. Okay. So let's first go on the browser and let's see how you can basically accessing here the large language models. So this is, you can see this is the console.grok.com and the playground. So this is the Grok OS services. Here you can basically accessing here your large language model. It's free and open source. So what you can do, just you can go on the docs, you can read on here which kind of model is basically available. You can see productions model, the preview model, you can use any of them. So you're going to using here Llama 3.3 17 million versatile. So for that, just need to go on this API key sections and you're creating here an API key. So you have to give it here a name. Let's say this is our AI agent. And then you're clicking here to verify this, and it will give you one API key. Just need to copy this API key and you have to paste it in your VS Code. So what I can do, it will verifying that. Okay, I'll copy this, click on submit. And then after that, I'm simply going to actually copy here the API key from here and store it inside our .env file so that you can access it. Okay, don't copy this out. I'll invoke it after recording the video. Okay, so let's click on here, and now let's say the Grok API. So Grok underscore API underscore key. Okay, it should be underscore, right? Sorry, my bad actually. And then I'm going to store it. Okay, and then we also store here the Open Weather API key. So what you can do is simply going to go on the browser again, and this is the weather API. So what you can do, I just already creating here the actually account on that, and now let's click on the API sections, and then we can basically accessing here the API. So you can see, you can read the documentation on here. So I can go on here, and now you can see my API keys. Okay. So what I can do, I am simply going to sign up with your account. I need to sign up here again. I don't know why it's the session is expired. I need to sign up here again. Let's click on here. Okay, I sign up here, and I also get my API key. So I'm going to copy this out, and then I'm going to paste it here. Let's say open. So it should be the open weather API key. So to give it here my open API weather API key. I will get it. I'll give it later on. That's not a problem actually, because I cannot share it here. And then I need to also give it here Todoist API key. Let's say Todoist API key. And also give it to here my Todoist API key. How are you basically storing here other tasks? Okay. So let's click on here. Just sign up with your account, Gmail account, Todoist, and click on here, and then you can see the setting. And then you have the integrations, and you need to go on the developer, then you can see the API key. Just need to copy here the API key from here. So what I can do, I am basically going to store here the API key that I copied from here in my .env file. Okay. So while I passed in here my API key that I copied from the browsers. So now what I can do, I am simply going to creating here a Python file inside my config. So that's called the config.py. So let's say config, it should be small letter, config.py. Here we basically essentially config here all of our environmental variables. Okay, so let's first import here the OS, and then we also import .env. So make sure that you just installing here all the module that you see I just used here. So let's say import here the load.env. Okay, load.env, and then calling it here load.env. And then what I can do is simply say that open weather API. Okay, it should be underscore API underscore key. So we can simply going to say that os dot get env, and here you basically give it to here open weather. Okay, it should be weather underscore API underscore key. Okay, fine. Okay, now let's also do it for to do ist. Okay, to do ist API underscore key. Same thing, os dot. I mean, we just secretly actually getting here the API key from the .env file. So let's say get. We can say that get env, and then we can simply going to say that to do ist. We can say the API key, or you can say the token. Okay, so you can say the API key. I don't know how what the name I actually give it to here. So I give it here to do ist API key. Okay, fine. So we can give it to here to the API tokens. It's called a token in the 2D IST. Then you have the grok API key. So let's say grok underscore API underscore key. So now let's say os dot get env, and then I can say that the grok API key. Let's say grok underscore API underscore key. And after that, we're simply going to making here full AI track equal to false for right now. Okay. So full underscore AI underscore track is equal to false right now. I just keep it here false by default. Okay. Okay, see, we just imported the OS, and that we also import here the .env. We load the .env, and then we initialize here our open weather API key, the 2D IST API key, and the grok API key in our config file. Now to save it, you can see the sign. It's mean that the file is not saved. You need to save it. Control S. That's it. Now we simply initialize here our model. So let's click here in the model. So here you can see. So you can basically creating here a file that's called llm.py. So in here, what I can do basically, we're simply going to import here fast OS. I don't know if it's needed or not. Let's import it, and then also from LangChain. See, from LangChain underscore grok, we import here. We can import here the chat grok. We import here the chat grok. So then from config, see, from config.config, I mean, we just go to the folder called config and .config, and from the config, we are going to accessing here our grok API key. See, it give me auto suggestions, the grok API key. It's mean that from the config file, we just accessing here the grok API key, because it's also accessing here our large language model, right? Now let's getting here a function called def get large language model, and then we're simply going to return here, let's say chat grok, and then you give it here initialize here our model. Okay, so let's say model is equal to llama 3.3 17 billion versatile. Here you go. And then you have our API key. So let's say API key is equal to, okay, it should be the grok API key. So grok API key underscore API key. It should be the grok API key that you have it. Then you need to give it temperatures. You can adjust it if you need it. So let's say temperatures. Let's say, okay, sorry, my bad actually. Temperatures, let's say 0.7. You can adjust this based on your data. Okay. Now let's have it. So this is nothing but our large language model. So we define here our the configuration file, as well as we define here our large language model file. And now we are going to defining here our tools. So in our applications, we basically creating here the 4 tools basically. The first tools is for the launch vehicles. It's basically for launching some of the event is actually happened by Space Dap. So if you go on here, I'm in the browsers. So you can see the launch library, the Space Dapps. So here it basically give you some kind of upcoming launch list. How you basically filter out here, and we simply going to creating here an agent of that. So here you basically learn that how can you basically accessing the API key. Okay. So how can you basically access or getting the fetch the data from the link using the request module. Okay. Now let's go on here, and then you're going to creating here a file called launch, launch, launch. So let's say vehicle. So it should be vehicles. We can say the tools. Okay, tool dot py. This is our first tools. And second tool, we're going to creating here and math tools. Let's say math tools dot py. And after that, you're going to creating here and to do ist tools. So let's say to do ist. We can say that tools dot py. And the next one you're going to creating here and weather tool, okay, dot py. That's it. Okay. Now let's try to first creating here this launch vehicle tools. So let's closing this out. It not needed at all right now. We can also closing here the .env, and it not needed, it not needed, it not needed, and here we go. Okay. So first you're going to importing here the request because it's nothing but an link itself. Okay. So using request module, we can basically call to our any kind of links. So what else you can do is simply creating here a functions called def get launches. So we can say that launches, and here we basically taking here a parameter called limit. If you see the link, you can see here a special things called the limits. So let's take it from the parameters. So which one is nothing but integer? Let's say integer, let's say limits, let's say 30. It get up to 30 requests, or you can give it to 5, 6, or whatever you actually can. Okay. So let's give it here 5 for initial. I don't need this kind of request from it. Now we have the base URL. Let's say base URL. So if I see the base URL, this is the base URL that you can see. This is from the space tab. So this is the base URL. After that, you can see this is the base URL. So I copy this out, and then inside that base URL, I just give it here f string, and in the limits, we give it to your limits that is coming from the parameters. Okay. So this is our base URL. Now let's creating here and try and accept block. So let's say try, not try and catch because it's a Python programming language. So try and accept block. So in here, the exception is basically coming up here. We're just simply going to handle this out. So let's say accept. We can say that the request dot exceptions dot request exceptions as e. Okay, if we got any kind of connection problem like the timeout or any DNS type of issue, we're just going to handle it on here. So what I can do is simply going to print it out. Let's say print. We can say that f, and then you can say that error. Let's say fetching the launch data. Okay. Okay. Then after that, we simply going to return it. Let's say return here. Returning here as JSONs, not JSON. You can take it as a Python dictionary. So let's say event. So this is the launch event, and then we can simply going to also returning here an error. So let's say error, and we can say that it is a string itself, and the okay, fine. And you can also take it here another exception, which one is exception as e. You can also give it here key error or index error. So then we can simply going to printing it out. So let's say error parsing launch data, and you can simply going to say that the e, and we're returning here the same error we see on here. I mean the same launch error. You can simply going to returning it here. Okay, let's copy this out, and I am simply going to pass it to here. Now the try block, we need to let's make it pass right now. You can see the error is gone. So if you need to pass any kind of methods, you can just pass in like that. Now let's creating here our try block. Okay, so you can say that first you're going to give it here and get request to it. So you can just go on here and you can just copy this, and you can just give one get request on here. You can just use it. I mean, you can give it to here get request to using here the postman. Then let's see what are the requests we basically got. You can see the count, how many count it have, and you can see some of the request response. You can see the name, I mean name of that the launching event, the response mode, the Slack. You can see the Slack and launch designer, the status code, the last updated, when it's basically updated, the window end, when the window is actually started, the images you can see on here, and you can see probability, the failed reasons, the rocket, because this is a rocket launch event, right? So you can see we basically accessing here the API key, and this is nothing but an GET request. So let's say the request dot get, and then we give it to here the base URL. So which one is nothing but returning here and response objects, which one is containing here the status, the header, and the content. So we can say that this is nothing but my response, single response. And then after that, you simply go into checking if the HTTP status code is indicated success. It may be the 200 or 200 to 299. Okay. So we can say that response dot raise for status. And now after that, what I can do is simply going to uh, take the data in the form of JSONs. Let's say response dot JSON. We convert them into Python's JSONs. Okay, or you can say Python dictionary, right? So see, we first checking here, I mean return a response object, which one is specifically containing his status, header, and the content. And then you're also checking the if the HTTP status code is indices between the 200 to 299, or otherwise it basically raises on exceptions. You can see HTTP exceptions if the request is failed. Okay, in here. Okay, like 404 or the 500 errors. Okay. Now what I can do is simply going to basically creating here a list. Here we have all of the launches. Okay, so let's say launches. Make sure your spelling is correct. LAUNCHES launches. Okay, so you can say launches, and after that what you can do is simply going to iterate to all the launches from here. So let's say launch. Okay, launcher or launch. Okay, let's launch in data dot get, because we get it from the result. We get it from the, if I see on here, so you can see in the parameters maybe you can see count. It's basically an result itself. Okay, you can see results. We basically taking here this result from here because we have the URL, we have the descriptions, we also have the image URL. You can see the image, how the image actually look like for the space X actually. Okay, now we getting it from the results. Okay, not result actually, and otherwise we returning here an empty list if we don't have. And now inside this launches, we basically append it here that we started. So let's append, and we append here and list of dictionary. Sorry, not list actually. You append here dictionary. So what we basically do first, we taking here the launch name. Okay, if I see on here, you can see the name itself. You can see the SOH 2.1b, the frigate. I don't know how it's spelling. And you can also see a more launcher, like you can see the name is Russian Space Force logo. I mean it for the logo maybe. So you can see the name, the Russian Space Forces. This is the recent launches is actually happening. So we can say that this is the name itself, and then you can say that launch. So let's say launch and dot get. We're simply going to give it to here the name itself. So which one is nothing but the launch name. Fine. Now let's give it to here the provider. I mean which provider is basically, or the, you can say the company or which agent is basically launching here these programs. Okay, so you can say the provider. So you can say that launch. Okay, launch, and then you can say that dot get. So here you can get in here the launch service provider. So you can see that you can maybe get it on here. So I hope so. So just searching for the launch designer and launch update, last updated, and then we have the launch service provider. You can see launch service provider. So this is a nested basically JSON. So you can see the response mode, the ID, the URL, the name, the abbreviations, everything inside and nested. Okay, so what you can do is simply going to if we get any kind of errors, we basically get it, and from here we basically getting here the name. From it, we basically getting here this name. This is the Russian Space Forces. Okay, we're just getting here the names, and then we have the window start. So you need to give it your comma itself. So okay, here we go. So we have the window. So we have the window start, and then we can say that launch. Let's say launch dot get, So it should be the window start. Let's say window start. Okay, and then we have the status. Okay, so let's say status. Let's say status. Same thing. Launch dot get. We need to get here the status. Also from status, we need to getting here the empty, and need to getting here the name from status. If I see on here, so if I see the status maybe, okay, here you go, status, and from the status we have the name, and I can say launch is successful. Okay, this is nothing but the launch pad name, and then we have our okay status. Then we have the pad. Sorry. So then you can say that launch dot get, and then same thing we have the pad, and then we're returning here an empty JSON. Sorry, not JSON, actually empty dictionary, and from here we basically getting here the name. So name. Okay, this is a launchpad name, and then we have the location, from which locations right now in the launchpad. So you can say the locations dot get. Okay, so you can say that pad, and then we can say that the get, because this is basically a nested list itself. So locations, and from the locations we're also getting here the name. Okay, from the loop pad we're to getting here the locations, and then from the locations we're to getting here the name. Okay, don't worry, I'll give you the code as well as I will give you here the link, so don't worry about that. And then you have to give it to here the name. Okay, fine. So let's do on cross check. So anything wrong on here? I think so, no wrong maybe. Okay, so name is equal to launch dot get. We're getting here the name, and then we have the provider. So which provider or which agency is basically providing that, and launch dot get the launch service provider. And if we get any kind of no response error, so you're going to get returning here the empty dictionary. Then you're taking here the name, so you need to removing this part, and then okay, you need to also removing this one. And then we need to start, because we need to start when the launch time is actually happening. So we need to start, and status is basically launch dot get status. Okay, not location, actually it is a launch. Sorry, my bad, actually launch. So from the pad we have the pad, and from the pad we basically taking here the name, which one is nothing but the launch pad itself. And now from the launch pad we basically have our locations. Okay, now what I can do is simply returning here our event. So let's say return here the event. I mean the same thing we can copy, but without any error. Okay, so in here we can say that this is nothing but a launches. So let's say launches. Okay, LAUNCHES launches. I don't know why every time my spelling is it's not correct actually here. I don't know. Okay, let's save it now. So this is nothing but our tools for launching the vehicles event. Okay, in the space step. Now let's see how can we basically creating here the math tools. So this is super simple, super simple. You can basically creating here three functions. Let's say def add. That's our first function. So let's say we're taking here two value. It's a float, and let's say this is also taking here float. Okay, you can also modify these things. Okay, let's returning here the a plus b. My main motive is to how can you basically creating here the AI agent, such can be AI agent, and how can you basically call them. Okay, that's my main motive on here for creating the tutorial. Let's say multiply. So multiply, we can say multiply, and here you basically give it to here the a, same thing, floating point number, and then b is also the floating point number. Okay, we don't consider the integer. Okay, let's say a into b. Okay, not b is error by. So def, then you can say the divide, and same thing, float, float, and b is also float. Okay, and then we basically returning here the a divided by b. Okay, that's it. So that's our math tools. Now we need to creating here our Todoist tool. So now let's go on here. So for that, you need to actually installing here a library called the Todoist API underscore Pythons. So first, what I can do first, you need importing here the JSONs. Let's say import here the JSON, and then I'm going to import here the typing. We're going to import here the optional, and then from to do ist API Python, so that you can also calling here the to do ist Python API key. And from API, I'm going to import here the to do ist API. Okay, fine. And now from config, because it's also accessing the API key, which one is store it inside our config file. So that's a config. We're going to import here. So we're going to import here the to do ist API key. Okay, so why this error? Okay, it should be from actually. From. Okay, now let's get in here the API. So let's say to do ist API, and we can say that to do ist API key. Okay, so we have about API key right now. Now we're creating here two functions. One is for creating tags. So let's say you can say that add tags. I mean for adding here the tags, which is taking here tags itself, which one is string, and then another one is basically the get text. So another one is basically the get text. Let's make it pass right now. And another one is basically the get text. Same thing, it is basically taking here the parameter as a string. So okay, sorry, get text, sorry. So don't taking any parameter because it's just getting here all the text. So let's say this is also in a string. Okay, let's try to pass. First, let's implementing here this add text. So in our to do ist, what I can do, we basically do the same thing. You need to also do the error handling, and you can say that now accept. So let's say accept. Accept. We can say the exception as e, and then you can say that the result is equal to status. Let's say status. Status is basically error. Just returning here an dictionary, or you can say the JSONs. So let's say you can say that error, and you can simply say that string of the error. This is basically the error itself. And then the try block. So you can see try block. So in the try block, what I can do, we basically using here this API to add the tags. Okay, simple, add tags. You can see add tags, and here you have our content. Okay, not context, actually content is tags itself. So which is nothing but our new tags. So new tags, and then we can store it inside the result. So let's say result is equal to, we have the status. So let's say status, and you can say that this is basically the edit. I mean the status is added, your task is successfully added to our the 2DIST. And then we have our tax itself. So let's say tax, and the new tax dot content. I mean the content you have is just simply going to put it to here in our 2DIST. Okay, and then after that we can say that the ID, we need to also give it to your ID so that you can also access it later on based on the ID. So it will give you one unique UID. And then after that we also have a project ID. So let's say we can say that project underscore ID. So it's basically for how you basically creating here a new text. So let's say new text dot project ID. Okay, that's it. Now we simply dump it because we have the multiple value. So to return it, the JSON dot dump is simply going to pass it. I mean dump it in the form of JSONs, and then it's simply going to pass it to here result, and then we can simply going to give it here ensure ASCII. So let's say we can say that the ensure ASCII is, let's make it to here false. It's basically ensure here the proper UTF encoding characters. Okay, so this is how you can basically add one tax. Now how can you basically getting the tax from the to do ist? So we can get it. So for that, what I can do, we basically creating here an active to do list tax to returning here a JSON string basically. So we can getting here a list of that, list of dictionary. So let's list a dictionary. So here it have the string, also the optional string. Okay, just creating here and readable text. So and let's store it, initialize it with the empty list. Okay, so this is nothing but our readable text, readable text. Here you basically storing here the information is coming from our Todoist API key. Okay, now same thing, try and accept block. So accept, accept, okay, accept, okay, accept as, okay, accept, and we can say that we can just give it to here the exception as E, and then you can simply going to say the result. Same thing, we can basically give it to here. We can just give it to here this result. It not, it basically the same thing in here. Okay, now the try block, what I can do, we basically going to creating here a tax list. Okay, so which one is basically getting from the API. So let's say get tax. So it should be get tax. Okay, it should be get underscore tax. Okay, now this is basically a tax list, because in our application, in our API, it maybe have the multiple number of taxes. It has a multiple number of taxes. Now what I have to do, basically I need to iterate to all the taxes from it. Okay, so what I can do, I can say that for tax in tax list. Okay, it should be tax, not API, it should be tax list. Okay, it should be tax lists. We can say tax list, and from the tax list we basically get here all of the tax. So in our tax we have one due string. You have the tax, we have the due string, we have the priority, which one is basically priority based on the tax, as well as we also have the projects and also have the levels. Okay, now let's make it pass. I need to charging my laptop, and after that I will come again. Okay, so now what I can do, we basically going to initialize here our due string. So let's say which one is basically the due string itself, and then you can say that f is equal to, say that you can say that du. So we can say that du, and then we can basically say that text dot du dot date, and then we can say that if the text dot du else no due date. Okay, not, you can say that no due date. Okay, fine. Now to creating here an priority map. So you can say that priority map. So let's getting here the priority map. So what I can do, we have the 1, we have the 2, we have the 3. So based on that, we basically give it here some of the priority. If the task have the high priority, so it will show it at a first. So you can say that priority 4. So you can say that lowest, and then we have the 2. So you can say that this is the priority number 3. So you can say that this is the priority number 3, and then we have the priority number 2. So we can say that priority number 2, and then we have the highest priority, which one is nothing but the 4 itself. Okay, it's nothing but the descending or ascending order, like that. So we can say that this is the highest. Okay, so let's say highest, it has the highest priority. Okay, now we simply going to creating here a priority level based on that. So we can say that priority level. Okay, we're just getting that. So let's say priority map dot get, we passing here our tax dot priority. Which tax had the priority more. So we can say the priority, and then you can say that let's make it normal. If you don't have any kind of priority, so just make it as a normals. Now we simply add it to our readable text that we basically creating, which is not even a list itself. So you can say that readable text dot append, and here we basically give it to here our text. So it's nothing but a dictionary. So this is nothing but and tax, and then you can say there's tax dot content, and then we have the due. So let's say we have the due string that we created, and then we have the priority. So priority, so you can say that priority is basically the priority level itself. So priority level itself. Okay, PRIORIT. Okay, make sure the spelling is correct. Otherwise, when you're basically creating here your applications, it may give you some kind of errors. So let's say project, which is nothing but the get attribute, and you passing here the tax, and then you give it to here the project ID. Otherwise, you give it to here the unknown. Okay, let's say project ID. Otherwise, you can say that which one is nothing but the unknown. Okay, let's say unknown. Okay, unknown. And then after that, we can give it to here the labels. Okay, let's say labels. We can say that get attribute tax the labels itself. Fine. So you can give it a comma, and after that, what I can do, we basically going to returning here our response. Okay, so let's say result is equal to status of OK status, and then the tax is basically the readable tax itself. Okay, readable tax. Okay, this one. And now after that, finally we are going to returning it here. Okay, let's say return here the json.dumps, and you can simply going to say that result and ensure key is equal to false. Okay, so this is nothing but for the tax list, that how can you basically get in the tax. Okay, now let's save it. Now after that, into also creating here our weather tools API. So let's create it after the charging. Okay, so now let's start building here the weather tools. So for that, first I'm going to import here the request. So let's say request, because you're going to using here the open weather API, and then I'm going to import from Pydantic. I'm going to import here a base model. So let's say base model, which one is basically containing here all the property, which one you're going to start it from the open weather API. Then we are going to import from typing. We're going to import here the optional. Okay, it should be the optional, and then from config, I'm just going to import here the open weather API that we basically initialize it here. Okay, let's say open weather API key. Okay, now we're creating here a class, which one is nothing but the weather output class, and this file is basically containing all of the tools which is regarding to these weather tools. Okay, so you can say that, let's say class, you can say that weather output. Okay, should be output, and which one is taking the base model itself. Okay, base model. And now we're creating here some of the variable name. Let's say temperature, that we are going to basically start it. So to give it here the data type. So temperature is basically in the form of floating point number. So floating point number. Then we need the description, which one is nothing but a string itself, and the humidity. So humidity, you can say HUMIDITY, humidity. It's basically integers. And then the wind speed, you can give it to here the floating point number. And then the unit, so unit is string. So let's take it as a Celsius. Okay, you can give it to here the Fahrenheit or Kelvin, whatever you can, but it's better to using here the Celsius. Okay, Celsius. Cool. So this is nothing but our weather output class. Now what I can do is simply going to calling here the weather API and returning here and weather output objects, basically based on this response API response. So I'm going to creating here a function called let def get underscore weather. We can say that weather, and then it is basically taking here a location, because based on the location it give you the weather report. So it's string. Otherwise we can say that the optional, so optional, and then it's simply going to inheritance these things. this weather the weather output that we have actually. Now we first checking that if the weather API is correct or not, or we get any kind of error or not. So what I can do is I can say that if not the open weather API, I mean if it is not provided or not, so you can just printing here some kind of error message. So you can say that, let's say error, I mean in the console you can painting this out. That's error weapon weather. You can say the open weather underscore API underscore key not set in environment variable. Okay, variables. It's nothing but an edge case, and then we returning here the none. That's it. Now if we have the API, so to creating here and base URL. So the base URL is basically nothing but https, okay, http, and then we can say that open API dot open other API open. You can just go on the browser as well, so you can see the open other API. You can just go to the API key section and you can also get the link out from here. Okay, so just give it here open weather. So let's say open weather map.org, and you can give it here data, let's say 2.5 and the weather. Okay, so this is the base URL. See http then slash API dot open weather map.org data 2.5 and the weathers. This is the base URL. Now I need to initialize here some of the parameters. Let's say param. So in the parameter, first we give it to here the locations itself. Okay, so let's give it to the in the double quotation. So you can say that this is the location, I mean which location that you are going to start it. I mean which location you are getting here, you wanted to get the weather update. Okay, and then we have the app ID. So which one is basically the application ID, or it's basically passing here the open weather API key. Okay, and then we can have the units. So units is basically matrix. Okay, so matric, it can be anything matrix. Basically we getting here this Celsius, you can see the unit by default. Now we need to creating here the try and accept block. So try, and then you have the accept block. So here you basically handling here our error. So we can say that accept, okay, accept, okay, accept, okay, accept exception SE, or you can say that request dot exceptions dot request exception SE. So if we got any kind of exception, so you can say that we can printing this out same like we do before. So let's error fetching, okay, error fetching weather data like that. Okay, weather data, and then you can simply going to printing this one. Okay, and then we basically returning here the none. Okay, return none, and then except here that we can have the maybe key error. We can have the key error or index error. It may be happen in the case of weather API. So let's say SE, and you can simply going to printing it out. Let's say we have the F string, and you can say that error parsing weather data. Let's say weather data, and then you can simply going to returning here the none. Okay, because in some kind of cases in the weather API you may get some kind of key error, or you might get some index error. Okay, just we handling this out. Now let's go inside this try block. So here we basically initialize here our base URLs as well as our parameters. Now in the response we simply going to give it to here one get request. So you can say that request dot get request, and we passing here and base URL, and in the params we basically passing here our parameter that we basically initialize. Okay, params. Now now what I can do, we basically going to raise an exception for the bat request code. It's meant that when you basically get one request to the server, I mean the API, it basically give you a response. But if you get one bat exception error, it will try to handle this out. So you can do it, let's say responses, you can do the responses or response or raise for, you can say that raise for a status. Okay, and then after that we simply going to take it the data and convert to the Python dictionary, or you can say Python JSON like that, and then we're simply going to return it in the form of weather output. Okay, so let's say weather output, and we simply going to give it to here, because we have the variables that we actually initialize in our base model. So let's say data of, let's say, main block, the main block, and from the main block we basically have our temperatures. Okay, so let's say temperatures, and then we can give it to here the description. We can say that data of weather, and you're taking here the 0th index and taking here the description. Okay, you can also calling it in the Postman, then you can getting here this kind of JSON format, then you can understand it easily. So after that, what you have, we need to starting here the humidity. So because the humidity is equal to data of main, and from the main we basically starting here the humidity. Okay, let's say humidity, and then we have the wind speed. So wind speed is basically data of wind, and we have to collect here the speed. Okay, so this is the data that we basically going to return it here. Okay, and this is nothing but our weather tools. Now we are creating here our tools, we creating here our models. I mean, we creating here the chat graph model, and the configuration file we have, we also have our agents. Okay, we don't create the agent yet. Now we're creating here our agents. Okay, now what I can do is simply going to creating here the agents. So first creating here, let's say launch, you can say that vehicle. Okay, you can say the vehicle agent.py, because we're creating here the tools. Now we're creating here the agents. Then you have the math agent.py. Then we can also creating here another agent called poem, which can actually help you to give some kind of points. So a poem.agents. Then we have to creating here Todoist underscore agent.py, and then we can creating here the weather underscore agent.py. Okay, so now first creating here these launch vehicle agents. Okay, so for this case we basically using here the LangGraph. Okay, the LangGraph supervisors. So for that I'm going to import it, let's say from LangGraph. So let's say you can say that LangGraph, okay, should be lang L-A-N-G graph supervisor. Okay, not LangGraph dot prebuild. So from this prebuild we are going to first import here the create react agents. Okay, because we're going to creating here an react agent for that from the LangGraph, and the supervisor that we're going to create in, we are going to use it in our app.py file. Okay, now from tools dot launch vehicle tool, we're going to import here the get launch. Okay, that we basically created. See what we basically do, we're simply going to import it from LangGraph. From LangGraph.prebuild, we import here the create react agents. Then we are trying to combine them with the tools, the custom tool that we have actually created. Now we're going to creating here a function called def create. We can say the launch vehicle. So let's say VEHIC, okay, HIC vehicle agent, which is taking here a large language model itself, and here we are going to returning here and create react agents. Okay, let's say create react agents, and then we are going to passing here the model. So you can passing here the model is equal to our large language model. Then we have the tools. So in our tools we're going to using here the get launches that we basically created. Now we need to also give it to here a name. So we need to give it to here a name so that we can show it in our agent flow application. I mean, in our application you have an box called agent flow. Here you basically show here which agent is basically called. So you can give it to here a name. So let's say we can say that launch, we can say that vehicle, so vehicle agent. Okay, now to give it to here the special thing that's called the prompt. Okay, so I'm simply going to give it to here the prompt. So once I give it the prompt that you can see, so you are a launch vehicle agent, we give some instruction. You can see we give some instruction. Let's assist only with a space rocket launch vehicle related tasks, and make sure you use the tools that you have provided to you. You can see we provided here a tools called get launches. Once you have the launch vehicle informations, response with the details, and then indicate you are transferring back to the supervisor with the final answers. It means that when you basically it's getting here the output, it will automatically back to the supervisors with an final answer variable, with an final answer variables. Okay, so you can see this is our prompt actually. So this is how you can basically creating here our agents. Okay, now let's creating here the math agents. So how can you create that? We can simply going to do the same thing. We are basically going to using here this LangGraph prebuild. So you can say that from LangGraph, okay, LangGraph dot prebuild, we're going to import here the create react agent, and from tools dot math, okay, the math tools, we are import here the additions, the multiplications, and the divisions, I mean divided. Okay, so now let's create that. Let's say def create, we can say that math agent, and then you passing here the large language model itself, and we returning here the create react agents, and here we passing here our model. So our model is basically the large language model, and tools, we're going to passing it here at the multiply, divide, and then to give it to here a name. Okay, that's a name. So which is nothing but the math agent, you can say like that. Okay, and then after that you have to give it to here the prompt. So let's give it to the prompt. Okay, I'll give it. Okay, so all right, I give the prompt. So you are a math agent, and also give the instructions, same thing that we do before in the launch vehicle agents. So instruction, assist only with math related tasks. Don't assist with instructions that are not math related. For any math problem, you must use the provided tools that you can see add, multiply, or divide to perform the calculation step by step. Okay, so you can also creating here so many kind of tools. You can also create that in your math agents. Break down the complex calculations into a sequence of operations that can be solved by these tools. After you have to use this tool to arrive at the final numerical answers. Response only with the numerical results. Don't include any other text or explanations. And then you can see example of the tools you're basically using in the few shot prompting technique. So example of tool used for 2 plus 3 into 4 is equal to like that. So first you have to recognize the multiplications, you can see, and then you need to multiply them, and once you get the result you would have to perform the additions, and then you can use the add tools, and finally you would have the response with the numerical results, and make sure you use the tools that you have provided to you. Okay, see, we are basically writing the prompt in here for creating here this AI agent applications. So make sure that you give some instructions as well as give some examples. So if you give some examples to your large language model, your large language model is basically working very well. It is called a few shot prompting for basically giving some example cases to your large language models. Okay, so this is nothing but our math agent. Now let's go on the poem agent. So this is our poem agent. So simple, same thing. So from LangGraph, okay, from the LangGraph dot prebuild, we can basically using here the create react agent. Okay, so let's see, because the create react agent, and then you have the def, we can have the create poem agent, and we passing here the large language model itself, we returning here the create react agent, and then you simply going to give it to here the model. So model is our large language model itself, so you don't have any kind of tools because you are not creating it for the poems. And then you have to give it to here a prompt, as well as you have to give it to here a name. So let's give the name as a poem agent, and then after that I'm simply going to give it to here the prompt. Let's say prompt, here you go. So this is a prompt. So you are a poem agents. Anything wrong? Yep, you need to give it a comma. So you are a poem agent. Instructions: write funny poems. Poems should not be more than 4 lines long, so that it is very difficult to show it in our applications, right? So let's save it. And now let's go on the Todoist agents in here. So here you can do the same thing. You can basically copy it from here. Just we can basically change the name from it. Okay, So this is the vehicle tools to the Todoist tools, and this should be the add text and the get text. So add text comma the get text, and instead of the create launch vehicle agent, so you can say that create Todoist agent. Okay, and in passing here our large language model. So instead of get launch, we have to add text and also the get text that you have. Okay, get underscore text. And in the name, we need to give it to here Todoist agents. You can say that Todoist underscore agents. That's it. Now we need to give it a prompt. So let's give the prompt. So well, I just give the prompt. So you are a tax, so you are a 2D East agent. You are able to access a tool listed stored in the to-do list. So instruction assist only with to-do list related tasks. Make sure you use the tools that you have provided to you. Once you have the to-do list information, response to the details and indicate you are transferring back to the supervisor with the final results. Okay. So this is for the Todoist agents. Now we need to creating here the weather. Okay, so we can copy this out, and then we can simply go onto here the weather event, and then instead of the Todoist agents, we can say that the weather tools, and for the weather tools, we basically getting here our get weather. So you don't have the get text. Now let's make it. Let's create weather agent. Okay, weather agent. And then instead of the get text or the add text, we have the get weather. We have the get weather, and instead of the Todoist agents, we have the weather agent. Okay. Now to give the prompt, so let's give the prompt on here. So all right, we give the prompt. So you are a weather agent. Instructions assist only with the weather related tasks. Start in the location from the user prompt. Make sure you use the tools that you have provided to you. Once you weather informations come and response with the details and then indices that you are transferring back to the supervisors with the final answer. Same prompt we are basically giving to here. Cool. Now we need to creating here our Flux applications. Okay, we need to calling here all the things that we created here, agents, the tools, and the models, and then after that we simply combine them with the Flux SSE. Okay. Now first what I can do, our aim is to actually building here and multi-AI agent system where one supervisor agent is decided with some special agent like the math, the poem, the Todoist, the weather, and the launch vehicles. And in the back end, we basically run in the Flux and the SSE. See, the term is called the SSE. Also stand for server send events. Okay, I mean we are going to creating that streaming so that response arrive incrementally instead of waiting for the full completions. Okay, it will coming here, it's coming instantly. Okay, it's not waiting for the full completions. Okay, we're going to using here this as the event in Flux. Now what you can do, basically we are going to basically creating here the agents that we have. I mean create the math agent, the point agents, we creating here the weather agents, the create launch vehicle agents, 2D and that's it. Okay, now let's try to creating this out. So what I can do, first I'm going to removing all the code from here. Here you go, and then I'm going to importing here again. Let's say first I'm going to import here the OS, then I'm going to import from typing, I'm going to import here the list, and then from LangGraph Supervisor, we're going to import here the create supervisor. So you can say that supervisors, and then from Flux, so import here the Flux, the request, and also the response. Okay, let's say response. We can say the response, and also from Flux codes, we import here the codes itself. Okay, and then you also import here the JSON because you have to pass in the data in the form of JSONs. Okay, so this is the important, basically important part. And then after that, you also need to import here our agents that you actually created. Now from agents, I mean from this agent folder, first we're taking here the math agents, and then you're going to import here the create math agent that you basically created. Now from agents dot poem agents, we import here poem agent, I mean create poem agent, that you basically write on here. You can see the function that you write on here. Okay, just call it one by one. Now from agents dot weather agents, we're going to import here the create weather agent. Then from agents dot launch vehicle agents, we can import here the create launch vehicle agent. And now from agents dot to do ist, we import here the create to do ist agents. Okay, to do ist agent it should be. So okay, to do ist agents, I don't know why it's coming like that. So you can say that create to do ist agent that you have. Now what I can do, we also need to import here the large language model. So it's from the models dot LLM, we're going to import here the get large language model that you have. So first we're going to create here our application. That's the Flask, and here you basically have our name, and then you passing here the applications to the cross origin systems, so that you can support with the different domain. Okay, now we need to initialize here our large language model, because the large language model is the main the main or core part to our applications. So what I can do, we're simply going to say that the LLM model. So we call it here because we already imported the get large language model. Okay, now we need to initialize here our agent that we already imported. So what I can do, we can say that this is our math agent. So we can say that create math agent, and we need to passing here our large language model. If I see this one, the function is taking here an LLM itself. So we need to passing here our large language model, and then we need to creating here for the weather agent. Let's say weather agent is equal to create the weather agent. So you can say that create weather agent, and you're passing here our large language model now. And then we have the poem agent. So you can say that poem agent is equal to create poem agent. Okay, poem agents, and you're passing here the LLM model. And then we have the launch vehicle agents. So launch vehicle, let's vehicle agent is equal to create launch vehicle agents and the large language model itself. Okay, so we have the large language model. Okay, we give it here 2 actually bracket. Okay, fine. Now after that we have the to do ist agents. So to do ist agent is equal to create to do ist agent. Okay, say the to do ist agent, and you're passing here the large language model. Okay, now we have our all of the agents. We imported all of the things on here. Now we need to creating here a prompt that is used to configure the supervisor agent behaviors. So for that, I need to creating here a variable called supervisor prompt. Okay, so let's give it the prompt here. So you just give the prompt. I'm not also saving this out. Okay, so it's better you can close all of them, or you can just save all, and then after that you can simply go to closing all and just opening here this app.py file. Okay, so this is the prompt. You can see you are a supervisor managing multiple agents. A poem agents, it assign the tasks, explicitly asks for a poem or creating the writing to the agents. And we have the math agents, we have the weather agents, we have the launch vehicle agents, also the to do ist agents. So assign work to that one agent at a time. Don't call agent in parallel. See, don't call agent in parallel. Just call one after another. When the user provide a request, determine the most suitable agent to handle it and transfer to the request to the agents. Okay, that's why it's called a multiple AI agent system, right? It will handling them because we're using here the LangGraph. Okay, so I may make requests that require you to use multiple agent. In the case, please break down the activities appropriately and the transfer key information from the one output to the another agent output. Okay, when you have to using the multiple number of agents. Okay, so once an agent has completed its tasks and indices, it is transferring back to with the final answer. You can say transferring back to the final answer, and you must take the final answer and present it directly to the users in our UI. So you can remove any reference to the final answer to clean up the response, and your own quickly style to the final response. If it have any kind of responses or which will have some kind of instruction or any kind of references, you can just remove them. So if any information is missing for the agent to complete the task, re-prompt the user for the missing details. Okay, re-prompt the users to missing details. If the request is not suitable for any specialized agent, feel free to answer with at you would if I was having a normal conversation with you as a stand whole language model. Okay, if the request is not suitable for you, okay, just give it some kind of a normal request, just like we connect with the chat GPT like that. Okay, so now we need to initialize here our supervisor agent. We have the supervisor prompt. So what I can do, we can say that supervisor. So let's say supervisor, and then you can say that create supervisor, and here we basically say that model is equal to large language model, and then we can give it to here the agents that we have. So the agent is basically our poem agent. Then we have the math agent. Okay, it should be the math agent, the weather agent. So you can have the weather agent. Then we have the launch vehicle agent, and the to do ist agents that we have it. Okay, to do ist agents. Okay, and now we need to give it to here our prompt. So we need to give it to here a prompt. Okay, should be prompt. So the supervisor prompt. Okay, supervisor prompt, and then at the hands of back message to the true, because it's just back the message transferring back to the supervisor, so that supervisor can calling here another agents. Now we can say the output mode, because the output mode, it's basically full history. Okay, let's say full history. Okay, that's it. Now we need to compile them. Okay, you can also give it to your output, but as a last message you can also give it to here, just I give it to the full history, because you need the full history as well. So compile it now. So this is how we can basically creating here our supervisor agent. Now we're creating here our route. So let's creating here route. So let's say app.route. So you can say that route is basically the prompt, and then we have the method. Okay, so method, because this is an post method. Now let's initialize here two global variable. One is a current message. Okay, one is a current message, it's 0, and another one is a request process. Just make it empty. So this is basically used to count the current message to help to provide her some duplicate from the input, the response system. And this request process is used to hold all the agent or step or process or tools that is used to process the request. Okay, we'll use it later. First let's take it. Okay, now in here we can creating here a function called handle. We can say that handle the prompt, and then we have the prompt. We just take it. So let's say prompt, we just take it from the request.json. So let's say request.json in the case of prompt. So highly basically testing this out in the Postman, that you can also see it easily. And then we're returning here a response. So response. Okay, response with a function called generate stream. With a function called generate stream, which one is taking here and prompt itself. And then we give it to here mimi types. Mimi type is equal to text event stream, because we're using here the Flask SSE. That's why. So you can say that text, we can say the event stream. Now to creating here this generate stream functions, but before that we're also creating here another function which is called submit prompt to the large language model, because we're also submitting here our prompt to the large language model, and our large language model is give some output. But let's try to first creating here the function called get the generate stream. So let's say generate stream, and then it also taking here a prompt, and by default let's make it pass. Okay, So it's basically generating a stream for server sees for server sent event, also called the SSE, from the large language model response. And we give it to here the prompt. So prompt is nothing but the prompt is basically passing to the large language model itself. Okay. And now this function is calling here another function called the submit prompt to the large language model. Submit prompt to the large language model. So let's create this one. That's a def submit prompt to the large language model. Which one is taking here a prompt itself? So prompt itself. And now what I can do is simply going to submit a prompt to the LangChain agents, or you can say the math agents or the poem agents or any kind of agents that you created, and your response to that is basically generated. This function is actually true. So it's taking here a prompt that is pass it submitted to the large language model itself. Now what I can do is simply going to creating here some kind of chunk. We're creating here some kind of chunks in this stream so that the chunk is contain some various AI messages, and the tool is basically use the record that are returned by the API. Okay, just take it in the form of chunk. So let's say for chunk in supervisor dot stream that we basically created, supervisor dot stream, and then we are taking here the message. Okay, let's say messages, and then we simply go taking here the prompt. We just give it here the prompt to our supervisor, and supervisor is basically give one messages. So it should be in the dictionary. I mean in the form of JSONs. Now after getting here the chunk, so we can basically get here two things. One is agent name itself, another one is agent data. Let's say I call here a math agents. So you get here the agent data, also the agent name. So you can say that for agent name and also the agent data in chunk, okay, in the chunk dot item, okay, the items. Now if the agent data and the message okay, and the messages, okay, messages in agent data and is instance, I will write it down and I will explain it. In instance of the agent data of the messages, let's say messages and the list. Now let's see what actually happening on here. Okay, so we first checking that if the agent data and the messages in agent data, if it is here or not, and if it is instance of the messages, then we take it. It's mean that we have one messages. Otherwise it maybe have some internal error, it maybe have some internal error or any kind of error we may got from the agent data. Now if you don't get any kind of agent data error, we simply to process the message that is passing from the agent data. So you can say the agent data, which is a message itself. So this is the messages. So you can say that messages. Okay. Now for I in range to our current messages and to the length of the messages. Okay. Now our current messages is nothing but the 0 that we already initialized on here in the globally. To also initialize it inside our functions. So you can say that request process is equal to an empty list as well as a current message is equal to 0. Okay, now fine. Now in here we simply going to store it to the messages. So let's say message is equal to messages of I. It maybe have the multiple number of messages. Now we can simply keep our pretty printing for the streaming, or you can say the divine. So you can say that message, we can say the message dot, you can say the pretty. So you can say the pretty print. Okay, so that you can printing the pretty so that you can easily debug it. Okay, now we're creating here one response dictionary so that you can pass it to our front end applications. So let's say this is called response dictionary, and which one is nothing but an agent name and then we have our message.dictionary. So message.dictionary, that's it. Now we simply append it to our request, request process dot append, and then we passing here our response dictionary. It should be dictionary, and then we're simply going to yield the return. Okay, let's say yield, and then we can simply go into returning here dictionary. Okay, the first one is basically the response. So we can say the response dictionary, and the step is basically our request process, and then the done should be the false. Okay, and then now we're simply going to say that the current message plus one. Okay, you can say that current messages plus equal to one. I mean, the current message actually increases. Okay, so you can say like that. So after that, you pull out here the final message from it, and you're simply going to back to the response. Okay, I mean response back to the supervisor agents. Now what I can do, you can say that out of the chunk, we can have our final message. We can have our final message, and you can say that chunk.get, we have the supervisor, and then if we don't have any kind of value, just returning here an empty dictionary, and then get the messages. Okay, messages, and it an empty list because it had the multiple number of messages. We're just taking here all of them. If the chunk dot get here the supervisor, so if the chunk is basically getting here the supervisor, which is basically coming from the supervisor, we just take it. Otherwise we just take it here as a none. Okay, let's say get, we can say the get, we can say that messages, otherwise you can say the none. Okay, so this is basically our final response. Now, so if the final message here, so if the final message, if it have the messages, and you can simply go to return it. So you can first printing here, let's say we can say that at type string. Oh, my bad, actually. We can say that JARVIS or the AI agent. We can, let's make it JARVIS. Okay, JARVIS, and you can say that the final response. Okay, so you can say that the final message dot content. Okay, and then after that we are simply going to yield it, and then we can simply going to give the response. Okay, back. So you can copy this out, we can pass it to here, and in the case of responses, we need to have the responses of the supervisor. So we can, okay, this is nothing but like that, this is the dictionary itself. Okay, like that. Okay, fine. Now in here we just give it to here supervisor. So supervisor, and then we have our content, and then we have our final message, okay, dot content, and then in our request process we also pass and also the make it as a true, because right now it's done. So content is basically final response, and it also have another bracket actuals. Okay, now else we can simply go into copy this out, and then we can say that done is also true, but the response is nothing but our no final response. Okay, now let's say no final response. That's it. Okay, now let's calling this out. We can format the document, I hope so. Okay, it's not here, I don't know why. So here we go, and now we're simply going to calling this out. Okay, so let's say if the name is underscore underscore main, main, and then we're simply going to running our applications. Okay, let's say app dot run, and you give it to the port number, let's say 111100 like that. Okay, okay, so our code is ready right now. Now you can basically run in this one. Let's first try this out, but it also opening here our postman. Let's open in the postman first. Okay, I just opened the postman. Now let's click on here, and now let's say run python file, and let's see we got any error or not. It may maybe we may have got some error, but not sure, because it may be happen. It's basically the human error. Okay, now it's running, and make sure that you are using Python 3.12 that actually use it here, and it obviously taking few times, and you can see that it will getting that. Okay, functions may have the docketing if the description is not provided. So we may got some agent error. Okay, it's coming from the math agents. Okay, let's see what the error actually. From the math agents, we have the create react agents, and okay, let's see this one. Functions may have the docketing if description is not provided. uh, let's see this and why this error actually. So already basically getting here this kind of error just because of the tools. We don't mention it in our tools yet actually. If I go inside this launch vehicle.tools, I already get it out. You're using here a things called from langchain underscore core dot tools. You're using here these tools so that it can actually access it easily. Otherwise, you can also give some kind of descriptions to it. If I go inside this math tools.py, then you can see I just add some descriptions. Okay. So that's why we basically got in here this kind of errors. As well as if I go inside this Todoist tool, same thing, you can see that we actually adding here, I mean, we're just mentioning here these functions as a tools because that is used by our applications. Same thing for the weather tools, and we just mention them as the tools so that they can actually use it as a tool. Okay. So now if I go into this app.py file, it also having a problem that see we don't implement the generate stream yet. Okay, that's also one problem. So what I can do is simply going to implement it. Now we have our submit prompt to LM that you can see. Now you can get all the data from it. So let's say from for data. So let's say for data in submit prompt to large language model, and you passing here the prompt. So our when shaft is on, just snooze it because it's not needed at all. And then we have the JSON underscore data is equal to JSON dot dump. Okay, JSON dot dumps of data, and after that is simply going to return here. I mean, we're simply going to give it here yield, and you can say the f string. Okay, f is string, and the data, and then you have the JSON underscore data. Okay, and you can give it to your backslash n backslash n. Okay, you can say that backslash n backslash n. That's it. Okay, that's our app.py. Now let's save it and try to go on here and try to run in this Python file. Okay, so we can closing this out. Now after that, what I can do, we simply going to opening out our postman so that you can start testing this out. Now you can see our server is running. We can copy this link, and then let's opening here the postman. So okay, so this is the postman. So just replacing it here, and then I give it to here the prompt. So why prompt? If I go in the code, and then you can see that our route is basically a prompt. Okay, now we need to make it as a post request, and then to give it to here inside the body, then the raw, and the text to the JSONs. Okay, now let's give it to here a prompt. So let's give it to here a prompt. So you can give it to here like that. Let's say prompt, and then you can simply going to say that, let's say what is 2 plus 2. Okay, it's basically calling here the math agents. Okay, now let's click on here to send, and let's see you got any kind of error or not. So it's sending the request, and you can see it got some response. And if I see on here, you can see you got J.A.R.V.I.S answer. The answer is 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and J.A.R.V.I.S the answer is 2 plus 2 is 4. And you can see that one thing. See, name is supervisors. Tool calls transfer to math agent. See, it calling the math agent. Same transfer to math agent, that's the tool message. And AI message is, you can see it have some ID, and then it will basically do the additions. You can see which tool is called and which function is basically called. And then we have the name is math agents, and name is math agent. And you can see transfer back to supervisor, and it is directly controlled by the LangGraph. And if I see this in stream, you can see the data, the supervisor, you can see additional KWARG, you can see which tool is called, and which the questions about what is 2 plus 2. And if I see the answer and the content, you can see here we got in here the value as a 4. Okay, so you can see that the content is 4. So transferring back to supervisors. So this is nothing but for agent flow, so that you can also show it. Okay, so you can see the answer is 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 on here in our data response. It's coming from the supervisor. So you can also say that let's say current weather in Kolkata. Okay, just testing this out. Okay, now let's say I'm going to click on send again. Now it will send me the request it, and you can see current weather in Kolkata. And if I go on the terminal, and the current weather in Kolkata is pretty cloudy, and temperature is 28 degrees Celsius, and humidity is 60%. Same thing, if I go on here, you can see it's calling here the weather agents. Okay, if I go on here, you can see that successfully transferred back to supervisors, and you can see the current weather in Kolkata is partly cloudy with a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius and humidity of 60%. So you got in here a response from our applications. Now we're simply going to convert these full things into an front-end applications. Okay, so that you can also show it just like a chatbot. So now let's start building this out, and after that. So all right, so now it's time to creating here our front-end applications using the React.js. So I just add here some of the steps, so you can see on here, so that you can easily creating here the React applications, as well as we can set up here the tailwind CSS. So let's click on Markdown, Preview, and Hinge, and then you can see that how can you basically creating here an React project using Bit. Okay, so what I can do, I am simply going to copy this out. Make sure that you have installed here the Node.js in your systems. So just copy this out for creating here and new projects. So I'm going to click on here and go on terminal. Let's say new terminal. And then I have to give it here. I just need to pass it here. Let's say npm create bit at the rate of latest. Let's make it as a front end. Let's say front end. And after that, we need to go inside this folder called frontend, and also selecting here the framework. So let's select here the React, and then I'm going to selecting here the JavaScript. And then I have to go inside is the frontend folder. Let's say cd frontend, and then it is installing here the npm packages. Okay, let's say npm install. Here you go. Then after that, it will basically installing here all the necessary package, and then we can just type here npm run app, and you can see the interface. Okay, just need to wait for a few seconds for installing these modules. All right, so our package is installed correctly, so you can say that npm run app. So it's basically running in the local server, local host. So you can just click on here to click on follow link, and then you can see it's opening my browsers. So localhost 5173. Now it's also installing here the tailwind CSS. But let's try to see the React.js framework. Okay, you can see Beat plus React. So it's nothing but encounter application that you can see on here. So now what I can do, I am simply going to go inside our, again, VS Code. And then we are basically going to installing here the tailwind CSS. So I'm just going to copy this out. And then I'm going to stop the server. And then I'm going to paste it here. So let's click on paste, and it will be basically installing here the tailwind CSS. If I go inside this front-end folder, then you can see we have the bit.config.js, as well as it will basically installing the tailwind CSS and the post prefix, because the post CSS and the auto prefixes. And then we need to also initializing here the tailwind CSS. It will basically creating here an tailwind.config.js file that you can see on here. And then to opening out here this tailwind.config.js, and we need to pasting here this code. So I can just copy this out. Okay, I can just copy this out. You can see it's creating here the tailwind.config.js, as well as it will creating here the post css.config.js. So you can just copy this out, and you can go inside that, and you can just going to paste into here. Here you go. and then we are going to add here the tailwind CSS to our CSS. So just copy this out and go inside the source folder. We have the index.css. Just select all of them and boom, and paste it here. And now we can basically use it. Okay, so I can just go on the app.css, but because it's not needed at all, we can remove all of them. And then we can also closing this out. Here we go, these ones as well as these ones. Okay, now if I'm going to running these applications, okay, first go on the app.jsx and try to removing all of the code from here. Okay, and after checking this out, the tailwind CSS is installed correctly or not. Okay, so we can say that div. So inside this one div, we can simply go to creating here a class name, and we can give it here class name. Let's say bg ret. Let's say 900, and you can say that the text is basically white, and you can give it here some kind of paddings, and then you can also give it to here the rounded. Okay, so let's say rounded. Okay, we can also stop the one shot because it's not hit at all. We can snooze it for the 6 minutes. Now to keep it to here a name, so you can give your, okay, let's give it to hello world. Don't put your girlfriend name here. Okay, just for testing. Kidding actually. So hello world. Now you can simply going to say that and pm run dap. Okay, we can easily testing this out. Now you can go on here and click on follow link. So now you can see it's basically loading it here, and we can ensure that our the tailwind CSS is basically installed. Okay, so I don't know. Yep, it's cool. It's working fine. You can see hello world with an rounded box. Okay, fine. Now, what we can basically do, because we're going to creating here an AI agents applications, so we're also creating here a folder inside our source directory. So inside that, I'm going to creating here a folder called components. Okay, you can say that components, and here we are basically creating here 3 JSX file. Okay, so here what I can do, you can creating here the first JSX file called the agent flow, which one is basically show the flow of the agent, which agent is basically called, we can say that JSX, and then you can using here the shortcut RAFC, which is nothing but the agent flow. Fine, let's save it, and now click on here, and then we're going to creating here our next one. Let's call the chat panel .jsx, which one is the chat panel itself that you see in earlier in our applications demo. And then you have the another one. Okay, let's make it RFC, and then we have the message bubble. So message bubble, which one essentially the bubble messages is appear in the chat panels. So let's say JSX, and you can say that RFCE. Fine. Now what I can do, let's go on the app.jsx, and then I'm going to removing these things, and just I'm going to removing all. Here you go. We don't need to use state right now because we can design it later on. Now we are basically import first chat panel. Let's say chat panel. So chat panel from component the chat panels, and then we also import here the agent flow. So agent flow, you're going to import it here from the components slash the agent flow. Now we are basically going to creating here a div. So let's delete that out. So div, and inside this div we have another 2 div, which one we have the left part and the right parts. Okay, so you can say that this is have the left part, okay, or this is for the right part. Okay, so let's say right part. Now this div, what I can do, we basically going to give it to here a class name. So class name, let's make it Flask, because of we need to divide them into the 2 part. In the first part we have the left part we have the charts, and the right part we have the agent flow. So you can say that Flask, and you can say that bg gray. So you can give it to here 900. Okay, you can give it to 900 and make it text is a white. So white, and you can also make the screen the height of the screen is full. So you can say that screen. Okay, so now this is our basically div. You can also removing this fragment because it's not needed at all. You already have the div. So now you're designing the left part and the right part. So in the left part you have the chat panel, in the right part you have the agent flow. So you can say that in the div. So you have the chat panel, which is the right side, left side as well, and this is the right side. So in this side you have the chat panel. So you can say that chat panel, and then in the right part we have the agent flow. Okay, anything wrong? Okay, we can just removing this out. We can removing this out, and you can just close it here. Okay, now in this part you're going to give it to here the agent flow, and here you go. Now let's design it. Let's say class name. So we make it flux one and make it flex, not flux actually, and give it to here flex column, and you give it to here border in the right part in divider, and then you have the border gray. We can say that 700. I just give it to here a border to that. This is the chat panel. Now we need to also give it to here the deep. So let's say class name. Class name. I know it's quite annoying to designing this part because I'm not expert on that. Even though I don't like to do the coding for designing here the UI. You can also using here the ChatGPT or the Google Gemini if you want. So let's click it here. Now let's go on the application. Now you can see we have the chat panels as well as we have the agent flow. Okay, you don't need to reload it because it is handled by automatically handled by the React.js. Okay, now we are going to creating here one state. Okay, so we're going to creating a state. I don't know it's for, yeah, you can format the documents. Now you have to create here on a state so that you can also changing here the agent step. I mean, which agent is basically called. So for that, you can basically using here this use state. So for creating the state, so let's say const, we can say that use state. Okay, not use state. So let's say use, okay, like that, use state. And by default, I just make it as an empty list. So in that, we have the agent step, and then you have the set agent step. You can set it as agent steps. Okay, so we're just creating here in a state. Here you have the agent step as well as we have the set agent step. So let's add it to the chat panel. So we can say that set agent step is equal to set agent step. Okay, anything wrong? Yep, right now. Okay, so we can also add it to here the steps is equal to basically the agent steps. Okay, because we just show here the agent step in our agent flow. So nothing fancy. You can see you can see any kind of changes on here. Now we're to creating here the agent flow as well as into creating here the chat panels as well as into creating here the message bubble. Okay, so I'm not going to creating here. I just have all the code in here. I just going to pass it here and try to explain all the code line by line. But for that, it's also installing here the two library. One is the React icons, another one is a framer motions. Okay, so let's try to also install them. We can say that npm I. We can say the React icons, and another one is the framer motions. Okay, the framer motion or the framer motion. I don't know how it is spelling. Okay, let's first installing here the React icon. Then I will let me see it, and then I will installing that. Okay, I'll back again. Okay, so now we can start. We can say that npm I, it's basically the framer motion. Okay, it also installing them. It is taking few seconds actually. And then after that, you're going to pasting here the code for the agent flow as well as the message bubbles and the chat panels. So let's pasting here the code. So all right, so you're pasting here the code for the agent flow, the chat panels, and the message bubble that you can see on here. So now I'm just going to explaining here all the code line by line. But before that, let's try to run this out. Let's say npm run that. Also, we need to also running here our app.py file, which is nothing but server file itself. So we can just opening this out, and you can just running here the Python file in the another terminals, and then in that we are going to running our server. I mean our front end server. So here you go. You can say that our server is also running, and our front end server is also running. So if I click on follow link, and then you can see our applications, how it look like actually. It is obviously taking time because it's loading. And you can see JARVIS instance, and you can see the agent flow, and it is waiting for the agent steps, and you can see that type message. You can type here. Let's say if I type in here hello and enter, you can see JARVIS assistant. Anything wrong? Sorry, actually pasting the wrong code to the message bubble. That's my bad actually. Now I can testing this out. Let's say hello, and now you can see the message bubble. So hello, is there something I can help you with? Would you like to chat? So unfortunately, I just pasting here the chat panel code 2 times in the message bubble. That's my bad actually. So now we can see the agent flow code. So in here, we basically using here the React icon that you can see, and we basically creating here an icon map. So you can see as a robot, as a users, and the chat circle list. So what I can do if I type here, let's say 2 plus 2. So you can see we basically it's basically waiting for the agent step that you can see on here, and you can see math agent is basically called successfully transferred back to the supervisors, and the answer is 2 plus 2 is basically 4. It's calling the math agents. You can see one curd, cool curd, as well as you can see one icon. So we basically give it to here this AI icons, the user icon, and the supervisor icons. Now we basically export default functions as called the agent flow. Here we have the text called agent flow, and then you checking here, checking for the steps. We are basically checking for the steps. So if the step length is basically 0, we can see that waiting for the agent step. Otherwise, we are going to show here the icons, as well as you're going to show the content that is directly passing from the chat panels. Okay, so sorry, not chat panel. It's basically passing from the parameters. Okay, as a props. Okay, so this is basically passing from the chat panel. Okay, it's just passing from the app.js that you can see agent steps. Okay, so you can closing this out agent flow. Don't worry about this code. You'll get this code in the descriptions. You can easily grab the code from here. So the step type, I mean, which type is it? Is it math agents or the weather agents or the launch vehicle agents or the which agent? 2D agents. Okay. So if I see in the postman, you can see that it have the variable called data, because it has a variable called data. If I see on here, it variable called data. How you basically calling this out, right? Now, if I see this out, this is basically on agent flow. So here it is basically taking here a step, and it will just showing here if the step is basically 0, it's just showing that waiting for the agent steps. Now let's see the message bubble. This message bubble is basically nothing but the bubble that you can see on here. The bubble you can see on here. How you basically typing this out. This is this message bubble. So we can basically going to designing this out. We are basically designing this out using the Tailwind and CSS. Now in this, if I see this code, we basically declare a component which one is basically a message bubble itself. You can say export default functions message bubble, which is taking here an prop as message that you can see, and prop is look like that. We have a role called users, as well as we have AI, as well as we have a content. It's mean that the role, it can be the users or it can be the AI, and we also have one content. Okay, that is basically we're going to pass it to our applications. So we have the motion.dip because we are using the framer motions. This is for the animations, and you have the class names. We have the user. If the user is here, then you can say justify, and otherwise you just start from the justify start. And then you have the class name, which one is basically user itself, and we basically show here all of the message.content. I mean, the message is basically stored. We just showing here all of the message content, which one is basically stored it inside our applications. I mean, inside our state. Now, this is the important one, which one is talking about the chat panel. See, so first we are going to import here the use state because it also handling the state. So we import here the use state, as well as we import here the message bubble from here. Okay. Now what you can do, basically we are basically going to creating here a functions called the chat panel that you can see on here, and which one is basically taking here and set as a step as a prompt. And then after that we are basically set up here to state for messages and the inputs, and then we have a function called send message. So you'll see it later on. First let's see this one, what is basically returned. So it's basically returning here one header, you have the JARVIS assistance, then one scalable message. So and it is just mapping here all the messages from it, and then it will show it inside the message bubble, because the message bubble is taking here and message itself. If I see this one, you can see here it's basically taking here the message message.content. Okay. Now in the chat panel, you can see that uh, we basically have the Jarvis assistants, and then we have the message map. We basically mapping here all of the messages, and then we have an input at bottom that you can see on here. So in this input, we have input tags as well as you have a placeholder called the type a message. Now inside this value, it will taking here one input, which is tag itself, and then you can see on chains. So how any basically calling here this onChains method, it will basically changing the data or pending the input data to the set input state. You're taking here year.target.value and on key down. When the user basically press the down button or the enter button, it will calling here the send message functions, or otherwise user can also clicking here this send button. Okay, so it will just calling it here. So when we basically pressing here the on down button, it also calling here the send messages. Otherwise, when the user is basically clicking here the send button, it will also calling here the send messages. Now, if I go inside the send messages, what it actually do, you can see that it is nothing but one async functions. It's also called the asynchronous functions. So if first checking that input is null or not, if the input is null, we are not going to take it here. And then we have the set messages, where you basically storing here all the messages. And you can say role is basically user and content is basically input. That is basically passing from here. And then you're going to set up here the user input and also set the input as a null for the first times. And now to calling here the API that you actually created. So we using here the fetch method. So a constant res equal to await fetch methods, and you give it to here http localhost 1100 and the prompt that you can see in the here. Okay, that you can see on here. Same thing, we give it to here, and then after that you give it to the method as a post methods, and the header is content type is application adjacents, and in the body we just give it to here string file because we need to make them string file so that we can also show it in the from of JSONs. Now we need to starting here the reader and the decoders. Now we are going to start it based on SSE. If I see on here in the app.py file, you can see that the Flask third basically created. It basically give generating here in stream in the case of SSE. So we need to also pass in the data in this format. So we need to have the decoder. We also have the record and the decoders. So you just decode it using UTF-8 unsigned integer 8, and then we creating here two variable, the AI apply and the steps. I mean how many steps it have, and you're creating here an while loop, and then we are going to starting here the value and the done from it, because if I see in the app.jx, so you can see here the done and how many steps you have. Also we have the responses. Okay, now we are just going to, if it is done, then you simply breaking this out. Now we are going to checking here the chunks. Okay, how many chunks we have. So we're taking here decoder.decode, and we give it here the value and stream make it as a true. And also you have the lines, chunks of lines, so that it can show it automatically. Okay, and then you can see the code for lines in lines, how many line it have. And if the lines is start with data, you can, if the line is started data, because if I see here the postman, you can see you have the data, it have multiple number of line. You can see that we're just taking all the lines. Now if the lines is start with data, and then we replace with data with the empty string, and then after that you basically parse them in the case of SSE chunks, so that you can easily plot it. And then after that we basically taking here the supervisor reply. If you see on here, you can see here this is the supervisor reply. You can see content, the current weather in Kolkata is partly cloudy with a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius and humidity of 60%. We basically taking here the supervisor response. Okay, so that's why checking the birds, the response, the supervisors, and the content itself. If you see that, this is the content itself. And then we are going to store it into the AI reply, which is basically AI reply itself. And after the dynamic agent flow capture, it also capture here the dynamic agent flow, so that you can directly say that which agent is basically called. And you're going to using here object.enter, and we parsing here the response, and then you filter the supervisors. You filter the supervisor which agent is basically called. Then we map to all the value which have the role and the objects, and you keep the type as a role and content is the object of the content, and simply we make it as a specify. And now you can see that if the agent.like is the len, then it's mean that our agent is basically called. And then you set up the agent steps to the steps. And if we have any kind of error, so you can say that bat as SSE chunks. I mean, if you get any kind of error which is coming from the server side, we basically say this kind of bad SSE error. So don't worry about this code. You will get this code in the descriptions at the GitHub link. You can easily grab this out. Okay. So if the AI replies, then we are going to set the message to our set message user test. Here you have the role as the AI because we're integrating here two roles, one for the users, another one for the AI. So this is the role for the AI, and we're simply going to show it. Otherwise, just show the errors. Okay, that you can see on here. This is super simple code, nothing fancy, nothing difficult. We see on that. So now what I can do is simply going to saving this out, and then we're going to opening here our terminals. And you can say that our application is running up and down. And here you go. Okay. Now we can testing this out. Okay. So you can go on here. Now let's go on the same thing. Localhost 5173. Now let's go on the full screen mode. Now it's time to testing out our application. So first let's say hello, and you can see that hello, how can I help you today? Do you need assistance with something in particular, or if you like to chat? So what is, let's say 2 plus 4 plus 6, or let's say into 3. So you can see that math agent is basically called, and the answer is basically 24. Okay. Now we can also testing it out for the tax, as well as we can testing it for the weathers. So current weather, okay, let's say weather in, let's say Kedarnath. Okay, so current weather in Kedarnath. So you can see weather as in is called. So the current weather in Kedarnath is overcast cloud in temperature of the 20.6 degrees Celsius, humidity of 97%, and wind speed of 0.34 meter per second. We can say that, let's say current weather, okay, weather report in Delhi. So you can see that current report of the Delhi is nothing but 13.5 degrees Celsius, and the H and the humidity is 66%. Now we can also testing here our current event. So let me, okay, let's say the current launch event. Okay, you can say like that. So it is basically calling the launch vehicle events agents. You can see the current launch event is Flacon 9 block, and you can see this one. Okay, status go for launch, and pat is space launch complex 40, and location is Cape Carnival SFC FLUSA. Now we can testing it out for the text. Let's add text. Project should be submitted by Chando. So it's basically the add tax. Now our tax is basically added. You can see Todoist agent is basically called. So tax project should be submitted by Chando has been added in ID. You can see ID. The project is the ID. You can see on here. Now show me the today tax. Okay, show me today tax. You can say that like that. So now we can see that just to white, it also calling it agent. So today tax for that, no tax available. If you like to add a tax, I can help you. Okay, you tax for today are no tax available. I don't know why it's not working. So okay, show me the available tax. Okay, available tax. So if it got any kind of error, so we can, okay, it seems like there is an issue with the fetching the to-do list acts. Could you please provide more information or clarify what you're looking for? I will do my best to assist you. Okay, I need to checking this out, and I will back again. So all right, the problem is actually happening in this Todoist underscore tools.py file. In this get talks, it's basically getting here one error in the due date. So I need to just handle in this one because I handle the due safety, and also you can do some debug for the safety print, as well as I removing here the tool options. I just added here some of the comment, I mean the format documents. Okay, so now I can basically running the code from here. Okay, so I can just go on here, and first let's try to running here this app.py file, and then after that I'm going to running here our front end. Okay, I mean our the React applications. Let's go on the terminal again. Let's click on new terminal, and then you can say that we need to go inside the front end. Let's say front end, and then I can running here npm run that. Okay, it may be happen, it might be happen because we are human, so obviously error to ho sakta hai, right? So if I see the cmd, you can see that it's also running up and down. and you can see our application is also loading. Okay, so now you can simply going to click on here and click on follow link. So you can see that it actually opening it in the browsers. So you can go on the full screen mode, and then you can basically testing here the same thing that we do before. So what you can do first, we simply going to adding some of the text, and then after that we are basically going to access the text. You can see my inbox is right now clean. I just cleaning this out, and after that you can see how you basically add in the text. We can easily see it in the applications. Okay, so you can see waiting for the other step. So let's say what is 2 plus 2, you can say like that. So 2 plus 2, you can see that it will basically calling his math agents, and the answer is 2 plus 2 is 4. Now let's say add tax. Let's say add tax. Let's say project. Okay, same thing. Project should be submitted by Mishu, like that. Submitted. Okay, it should be submitted by Mishu. Okay, like that. Okay, let's click on send, and now you can see that it will basically try to calling here the Todoist agents, and the task project should be submitted by Mishu has been successfully added to the Todoist. So let's add more tasks. Let's say add tasks. Let's say call to mom. Okay, at let's say 6 p.m. Okay, so it will also adding the text to our Todoist agents. So you can see text call to mom at 6 p.m. has been added successfully. If I see on here, you can see it basically added inside our inbox. Okay, now we can show all the, let's show all tags. So if I calling here the show all tags, then you can basically see that you can see the tags. Project should be submitted by Mishu and call to mom at 6 p.m. You can see we can easily access it. So in before, why are you are unable to access it? Basically because I forget to add it here the project ID. I mean, I have to add it here project ID as the parameters so that it can easily get the project ID, which project ID is talking about. Okay, now you can see our application is running correctly. Okay, now you can also see the current weather. There's the current weather in, let's say, Haridwar. So you can also see the current weather in Haridwar. So you can see weather is actually called. The current weather in Haridwar is 30.45 degrees Celsius with few clouds, humidity of 63%, and wind speed of 3.02. Okay, so this is how our application, full application is built, and this is how it actually works. So I hope you full enjoy this full tutorial, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and share with your friend so that we can get more subscriber, as well as you hit the bell icon so when we upload here new video you will get notified. Okay, thank you and bye bye. Namaste.